and move forward in his absence. And so we're just going to do a quick run of the agenda first. We'll start with if there's take any comments or requested edits on the meeting minutes from the last meeting, which were included in the materials. We'll pause for public comment. We've baked in a good amount of time today to launch some of the work groups for chapters 1 through 3. So we'll do a little briefing up top about what that might look like. And then we have breakout sessions for that work. We're hoping to have time today to continue the goals discussion that we started last time. We got through chapters 1 through 3. We still have 4 and 6 to talk about. So we'd like to do that. We have the total maximum daily load discussion, which is weighted and heavy, but this particular, I think, was on request from the committee to speak to a little bit more sort of the bounds of when might be stepping into asking to reopen the TMDL. And so the chair does have some thoughts on that, and we pushed it to the end of the agenda, hoping he'll be able to be here to speak to that. Otherwise, we might move that to another meeting. And then we'll wrap up with some reminders and preparation for the February meeting. Does that work for everyone? Any changes to the agenda? Okay. And then changing to the minutes. Oh, we do have the, okay, we marked you as absent, Brian. I'm so sorry for that oversight. We'll make that change for the last meeting minutes. Any others before we adopt through consent? Okay, great. With that, we'll move on to public comment. And Senator Harrison, you choose not to speak right now, just to participate.
Yes, I wanted to be able to speak, by raising my hand, but I don't have prepared comments.
Great. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comment right now? Gary said it looks like you're unmuted. Oh, fixed. Okay, great. Okay. All right, so we will start with the work group launch. Very exciting. Thank you all for the great conversation that we had in December, talking through some of the goals. And as a reminder, some of that discussion talked about whether we'd be able to get through this body of work collectively just in these standalone committee meetings monthly. And I think there was some consensus that some breakout groups or work groups to kind of take chapters might be able to help us make a bit more progress in some content development. So my understanding, and definitely open to the group, is that the work group includes study committee members, DEC staff support, and is welcome to have public members participate and engage in those as well. But they are not decision-making bodies, so they'll need to bring things back to the committee, products that they work on or key decision points. The current timeline that the committee has, and again, that's an iterative timeline, was looking at April to start the discussion on what we've called Chapter 5, which is the policy chapter, where we might sort of like think back on what we've learned for the last few chapters and start to make policy recommendations. That's really soon. That's only a couple meetings out from now. Might recommend to the committee to push that out at least to May. And then that gives the work groups, February, we have a guest speaker, but gives the work groups until March to bring some content / outlines to the committee, a little bit further along drafts by April to stage up the beginning of policy discussions in May as something to think about. So with all that in mind, that's a pretty tight timeline and timetable for the group. And that's why we tried to put on today's agenda almost an hour for the work groups to just get started, kind of getting to know how they might want to operate and what they do want to develop for these chapters. And so Danny followed up from December with a little survey to ask, okay, what are your interests in terms of the chapters that we've talked through so far, which is 1, 2, and 3. One right now is the stuff we've characterized as sort of the formation, incentives, disincentives, and statutory language that allows for formation of a regional entity. Chapter 2 is the permitting questions, the mechanics of that, how something can move from a per parcel permit to a more phosphorus focused permit. And then chapter 3 is mechanisms for revenue raising for such a utility. Do you mind screen sharing the spreadsheet?
Yep.
So what we have for today is a sort of breakout session charge for you all and tentative assignments. These are based on your results or interests. So the tabs on the bottom are chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think, Luce, your primary interest was 4 to begin with, 4 and 2, but we don't have 4 really talked through. So feel free to join another one for today. And so for chapter 1, we have Zach and Catherine as primary choices there. Chapter 2, we had Jenny and Christine as primary choices there. Chapter 3, we had Carrie and Lindsay. And that might leave some Brian. Maybe Brian was chapter 4 as well. So Brian, feel free to join another breakout group for today just to get a sense of this. And so what we've put together is what we call these outline beginnings for each of the chapters. Do you mind screen sharing an example of that? We have printouts for this that we'll have in the meeting. We have a facilitator for each of the groups that will have a digital version of this, their screen sharing. And then Danny has just uploaded these to the meetings page for the study committee too, if you want to have something digital to look at as well. So what we thought might be useful for today is for these breakout groups to talk with each other about why this chapter is of interest to you, what you hope it will cover, expertise and gaps, talk through that outline. The way these outlines were created was just basically taking the goals document and taking it out of a table. So it reiterates the statutory language, and the outline pieces is just the stuff that we've talked through and heard from the committee so far. I would want to be in this chapter, but they're very bare bones. So as to start to talk through that. And then there's a references resources section, which is either stuff that the committee already suggested would be great references or resources for this chapter, or I went through the materials page for the study committee and put stuff in here that felt very relevant to this particular chapter for them as well. So using the breakout session to talk through this document, flesh it out a little bit more, and then what the work group, looking at this, what the work group wants to have ready for March to bring back to the committee, what's needed to get it there, who would like to take on different components of that, how the work group wants to meet, frequency, timing, sort of the mechanics and logistics for the work group. And then thinking of looking towards February, where we will have SEMSWA present if there's any sort of chapter specific questions the work group would like to ask to such an entity to talk through. So that was what we were thinking this next quasi hour would be, as an opportunity to really just start to get familiar and dig into the work. And I'll pause there and see if there's questions. Yeah, Carrie, please.
Thank you, and good to see everyone. My question is about process. I presume that built into this process will be the opportunity for the members of the study committee to help review, evaluate other chapters, because I think that there is some strength with kind of the wrestling of various questions that are being addressed by each chapter.
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. I think it's right now we're envisioning that the work group kind of puts some pen to paper, whoever's in there, maybe with DEC staff support as well, but then brings it back to the committee, and recognizing committee members may have interest in all the chapters, but not necessarily the time to attend all those meetings. Then finding, moving after March and April, how do you then sort of cross share the materials and solicit commentary and input from other folks?
And if I may follow up, I think last time we had a preliminary effort to try to identify resources for us as we evaluate the merits contained in the study committee.
Mhm.
Since then, I'm sure all of us will come across important information that could be helpful, generally speaking, or for those that are perhaps taking the first cut on the chapter. Will there be a common repository of information that we can tap into while we undergo this work?
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. The study committee site page has a materials sub-page right now. Danny, if you could share that in the chat. Right now, that's sort of everything. It's not organized by chapter, but it's things that people have recommended leading up to these meetings and during these meetings. We're also want to be sharing the work group products in a public facing spot for the other committee members to have access to as well. So that's right now how we're contemplating. People can see just like general resources, but also progress and drafts from the work group on that site page. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and can we just send it to you or maybe Danny or somebody so they can upload that information?
Yes, Danny
For
would be
example,
great
I've come
contact.
across a number of resources that could be helpful for our study committee.
Wonderful. Yes, please do share. And Danny, if you could put your email in the chat, it'll be a great point of contact for putting stuff on the website.
Thank you.
Any other questions about what we'll be spending the next few minutes doing?
Yeah, I have one more question, if I may.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
please.
should raise my hand.
No, it's great.
The challenge facing us is pretty substantial, you can imagine, and I do appreciate the thought of having support by agency staff. I almost think that members of the committee should be supporting the agency staff. Kind of flipping that question around because of the expertise contained in the agency, and we're here to help support that thinking, that work, help identify resources and wrestle through these questions. But I think it's going to be this is a really complex topic, and it really, in my mind, requires the agency's technical expertise in helping to ensure that we meet the legislature's expectations.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Carrie. And I know that we've been having conversations internally about how to best staff and support and bring technical expertise to bear on the committee, on the work groups, and on the report as well, while still recognizing this is a committee's report and not DEC's report. So want to be sensitive that it's to help the committee make recommendations and also provide the expertise where warranted and requested.
Thank you.
Okay. So Chris, if you could raise your hand. Terry, if you could raise your hand. And I'm Gianna. Chris is going to be facilitating in person the chapter 1. Terry's facilitating in person chapter 2. I'm facilitating in person chapter 3. We have rooms. You can follow. Both my people, Lindsay and Carrie, are not in person. So for those joining remotely, on the agenda, we have separate Teams links for the 3 of them. So we're going to relocate to our separate rooms, ask that you follow your person, and then we will reconnect with you with those new links in those rooms. And we're hoping to reconvene here about 5 minutes before the next agenda item at 3, so around 2:55, just to debrief and make sure people have clear next steps leading up to March. Does that work for here? All right, great.
The people who are online that need to join our room, just give us a minute to move.
Yes, we are going to. Oh, yes, Jenny, any other comments, please?
Sorry, I didn't find my microphone. Just a quick question about chapter 2. It looks like there's such a relationship between chapter 1 and chapter 2. in particular, I think Carrie, your question resonates with me as well, because I think a lot of the chapter 2 pieces, we may want to look first at chapter 1. So it's just a question. I think it may make sense for us to join some of the chapter 1 discussion at some point, just because there's overlap, but we can see how it goes.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Do imagine a lot of this is quite iterative upon itself. Yeah. Yes, Carrie.
This is perhaps on a separate matter, but related to the overall theme. There's quite a bit of literature out there that describes the successes and failures of stormwater utilities. And it would be really important for this report to contain that information. Because obviously, if we're moving in this direction, or at least want to flesh out the opportunity to develop regional stormwater utilities, we, and in particular the legislature, need to fully understand what are all the pieces to ensure success in this effort. So I wanted to flag that because it doesn't fit nicely in any of these 3 chapters, but yet I think it's a critical part of the success of being able to promote or use stormwater utilities to address some of our water quality concerns.
Wonderful, thank you. We can capture that maybe in chapter 5, which is, conclusions and recommendations as well. Okay. Those online, please give us a minute to relocate and we will find you on, and all public members, please choose whatever is of most interest to you to join, and we will see you in those meetings. Thank you.
Chapter 2 is
Chapter 1.
chapter 2.
Right, we're in Greenstone. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you. How did that go? We'll take just a few minutes to debrief as our first breakout session attempt.
We need hours, not 20 minutes.
Yes.
It's just a lot.
Great.
To discuss.
A lot to discuss.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
We just got through to scheduling another meeting.
Great.
So,
Good idea. We should have started there.
We didn't get that far, so
Okay.
Well, we were looking at the outline and we were like, yeah, we're never going to get through all of this. So
yeah. Was having some time to really focus in on the outline though, like helpful to really start to feel like we're digging in and fleshing out? Was that
Item
useful?
1, right?
yes, I think it could take even a few minutes to know who's working together,
Yes.
to get in a room together.
Mhm.
I think even just initiating conversation because you just got to get started, right? The
Right.
hardest part to anything is this first step.
Right.
So I feel like first step, small, but it's there.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you all for being part of that fun experiment and our hiccups there. But the facilitators, if you haven't scheduled your follow-up meeting, the facilitators will follow up and try and get something on the books very soon to continue this dialogue and figure out what content each work group will be able to bring back to the March committee meeting. And so we'll be looking at that agenda as report outs, and we'll think more about what that might look like from everyone. So putting that aside for now, we still have another couple of chapters of this report that we haven't talked about as a full committee. And we were going to return to the goals document and maybe talk through what is currently chapter 4. And so with that, thank you, Danny, so much. So we have here, this is the stuff that we read as sort of like, okay, we formed it. They are responsible for permitting. They're accessing funding either through local fee raising or however. And then how do they go about doing their work? And so this chapter felt like it was capturing some of the operations charges of how they might find projects, the costs of operation. So the second part is estimating the cost to operate such a thing. And then the first one is like, how do they choose to distribute their funding, find projects, etc. So right now we have a very, very short outline of just reviewing how existing Vermont stormwater utilities do that sort of planning across their funds and projects. And also maybe taking the non-regulatory as another example of the clean water service providers and how they have a phosphorus target and how they go about planning and pipelining projects to address such a target. And then in terms of costs right now, we were thinking of, well, obviously providing a cost estimate, but seeing if we could do it based on any data of existing utility expenses, which I think Andrew Brown's report might talk a little bit about that, and maybe some existing utilities can speak more.
Yeah, he went over 3 different cost methods, right? Cost by population, cost by area. I'm trying to think what the other one was, but he didn't look at like cost per impervious area, which I found interesting because this,
Oh,
it
okay.
seems like that would be pretty important to look at. If
I don't
you're,
know if he got into cost per impervious, if he did.
He
I mean,
didn't,
yeah,
I don't
I was gonna say, the thing with Andrew's study in his report, just to keep in mind, is that it was very MS4 specific, and the requirements of the MS4s look very different from the operational stormwater discharge permit, which is what we're really focusing on here with the 3 acres. Because the MS4s have a lot of they have specific requirements for construction oversight, oversight of construction activities. Well, there's six minimal requirements that they have to
Right.
meet. Education being one of them. So
Correct.
there's a lot of energy and resources that go out to outreach and education.
mostly through the RPCs.
Yeah, the RPC stood up, helped to kind of bring some of those resources together and get, and then some public participation and, so construction oversight. So not to be dismissive of Andrew's research and his studies, but it is very specific to the MS4s, and MS4 permit obligations look very different than stormwater, discharge requirements from the operational permit side of things.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Is there a specific study or report that, I don't know if Vermont League of Cities and Towns is on here, of the stormwater utility, the 7 stormwater utilities in Vermont, and specifically those expenses to operate?
So there are 7 utilities because we were asking that now meeting and we didn't know. how
There
many
are
there were.
7 that we
There's
know
7.
of. Yeah.
Okay.
Not that.
I think that they vary dramatically or drastically, not dramatically, drastically. So just looking at some, if my memory, pulling off memories, so don't quote me on this, but I believe South Burlington, for example, their annual budget was anywhere between like $1.5 to $3 million annually. Other end of that spectrum was, 500 to 750,000 annually. So there is a very broad spectrum of costs associated, but that also ties directly back to, South Burlington's, their whole their whole system, they look very differently. All their waters are impaired. And so they're charged by the state to make improvements to all their surface waters. So they were threatened by the state that they would, weren't going to be able to do any more development because you can't meet clean water standards. So until you start making efforts towards that through flow restoration plans, you're not going to be able to continue to make any development. So they were really forced into having to take over a lot of permits in order to meet flow restoration plans. Other communities, I'll throw Williston out there just because I'm a little bit familiar with them. We have multiple surface water bodies, but only one of them is subject to a flow restoration plan, which means that the requirements for that community to take over systems is it's a lower threshold and, far less pressure to take over systems. So I think there's a lot that goes into those costs, and it makes it really difficult to use them as an example of what potential cost would be. I think, but yeah, so just put that out there.
Great. Thank you. Are there other thoughts on the content of this particular chapter, or it could merge with another chapter, or just anything that people feel like reading the statutory charge?
We have a hand up.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Carrie.
I think it's Southern Illinois University or Kentucky University does an annual stormwater utility study. And I haven't looked at this study recently, but maybe it contains some of the questions you're talking about relating to cost of implementation.
Great, thank you.
And I think I have in another group, Black and Vetch, VEATCH, Stormwater Utility Survey. Again, I haven't looked deeply into these reports for quite some time, but that might be a good thing to look into.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the state divided entirely into basins? I mean, I'm just thinking about existing geographical areas that could be used as a starting point.
There are, the entire state does have watershed basins that it's divided into, but there's not a standalone governing body whose governing boundaries align exactly with the major watershed basins of the state.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect theirs, but okay. So I just didn't know if that geographical area might be something that you want to look at as a regional utility.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. I know there's some discussion about like what is the size and scale of a regional utility. We have pending on this committee to actually create a definition for a regional stormwater utility versus a municipal stormwater utility versus just a stormwater utility, and what are the recommended scales of region. And in prior committee meetings, there's been some discussion about sort of what is the role, particularly with areas of the state where there already is a stormwater utility, MS4 communities, would they participate? Would there be a different structure for them?
You had a hand in the back.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah,
going to point
thanks,
out
Doug.
that the conservation districts are not exactly watershed boundaries, but some of them are more or less watershed boundaries and some are county based. So we are a mixture.
Isn't there like 14 or 15 of them?
There are 14 of them. Yeah.
14 in the state. Yeah.
So going back to the cost for implementation, just curious if there was anything that came out of like the finance committee or budget committee when some of these policies were actually adopted, some of these statutes were adopted.
Sorry, which statutes and which?
Or like, right, so we're talking about, so the 90/50 permit, so when we are looking at the, the cost of requiring stormwater utilities and operational stormwater discharge permits, my understanding is a lot of this is tied back to state statutes and requirements, and those should have gone through some kind of financial budgetary review, and so they'd be an understanding of the impact to the state residents, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I think there probably is good suggestion, Christine. Probably back in 2015 where they're passing Act 64, there might be a joint fiscal office analysis of those costs. There's also the treasurer's report that came out a year later that looked at the full cost of implementing the regulatory and non-regulatory TMDLs. So that's a resource that's on the site page that went through a whole bunch of stakeholder engagement back in 2015 and 2016 for cost. I'm not aware of any of that driving the cost to operate a utility as part of that, but could look into it, particularly with the JFO piece.
Right, and now we're starting to get costs of the projects for 3 acre in particular, because we're going through design.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in our town, I know Shane's on, I think it's 1.6 million is where we're up to about. And I was looking at Milton was over 2 million. So we have better numbers now to know, because a lot of these got the POA, right, grants.
Right.
And so we moved along and we've gotten more information, and maybe it'd be good to compile that so we know where we're at.
Agreed. I guess I keep going back to like not focusing on 3 acre
Right.
though. Just trying to understand the costs
In general,
holistically, and because if we do look at this from like a watershed perspective or a regional utility, I think we need to look at the potential cost outside of what implementation of 3 acres is, because this will ultimately adopt and encompass a lot of other operational stormwater discharge permits potentially.
No, that's great. And that came up in the revenue raising work group, we talked a little bit about whether there's a section of that that talks about, well, what are we aiming for? What are we trying to revenue raise for? And what is the cost gap? And so we do have more updated like 3-acre stuff, but also depending on where the committee is recommending the design, just like you're saying, Christine, it kind of depends on what the costs are. So we can lean on the treasurer's report as being much more holistic in that sense. It's not specific to 3-acre, it really is the full charge. Yes, Carrie.
I think I forget what I was going to say, believe it or not. Other than, I mean, we know that the MS4 permits and the other operational permits are, and the whole stormwater program of the state is a response of years of court cases. So I just wanted to also know that under the Federal Clean Water Act, there's an obligation to meet water quality standards, and failure to meet that substantially jeopardizes the state in being able to access any federal funding, let alone the potential of losing jurisdictional management control over surface waters of the state. So there's a big history there on permits, and that's every state has faced, and we're one of what, 45 plus states with jurisdictional control over implementing the Clean Water Act.
Thank you. Might move on from chapter 4. It feels like maybe less complex, sort of just operational expenses. We might look to survey if we don't have at the ready Vermont level stormwater utility data. We might look to survey folks, but agree, Christine, to your point that how applicable that might be would be hard to draw conclusions, both for us and for the legislature.
I sent Danny some, sorry. I sent Danny some materials from Montpelier when we were doing it. We asked a whole bunch of communities and we put some like comparison of like their rate structure of the different utilities. So I sent that on to you for what we were looking at for whatever time that need to have that.
All right. I'll plan to have that up on our materials webpage.
I now remember what I was going to say. There's we are talking about watershed scale utilities, the definition of regional utilities. And when you look around at the other states that have it, as I mentioned, there are thousands of them around the country. They're usually on the county level. So because of the county political jurisdiction, not necessarily watershed scale, because as we know, rivers cross boundaries, but out of ease of implementation of regional, it can be either on a state level or typically on a county level, not to mention local level.
So this is Christine Doherty. I just want to talk briefly about the local level with this. That's something that I feel like keeps coming up, and as you know, a chair member for chapter 2, that's something we talked about briefly and just kind of bring back. I think the concern with that approach is that it's you know, you're going to end up with a fragmented, try not to end up with a mosaic of different ways to approach this, right? If you have 200 different utilities across the state, that is not only burdensome it's just burdensome to everybody. I mean, developers, the state, the local municipalities trying to implement those. So I'm not certainly this is a committee by consensus, but I have a lot of concerns about trying to look at local utilities being the driving force behind a regionalized concept. And I don't think that was the intentional legislators when they sent us here to come up with the idea of regional. I think that local defeats and undermines the idea of regional. And so I know we don't have a county, but we have probably as many people in this whole state as many states have in a county. And so I think would really encourage the committee to think bigger than just local municipalities when it comes to utility and regionalization.
Thank you, Christine.
So I should just say that I very much support local utilities when it's appropriate for the town, and not many towns are not going to want the effort of a local utility. But there's more items than just the MS4 and the pollution issues. I mean, towns are spending a lot of money on just maintenance and roadways, and stormwater utility could possibly include about half of a public works department, which is a huge amount in a town's budget. And towns need more diversification of revenue. And it's not just having the same folks pay more, because you know the way that the stormwater utility is designed and would operate. It's anybody who generates stormwater off of their property. So churches, nonprofits who don't pay taxes now would pay taxes, and they would be subject to, or it's not really subject, but there would be an incentive. There would be a financial incentive to reduce the amount of stormwater generated. So I'm looking at that as being something really important to municipalities.
Yes, I will. You hit it right on the head for us. I mean, when we started the stormwater utility path, it was really about how do we maintain our infrastructure and less about how to deal with 3-acre sites. They eventually got wrapped into it, but I could see on the municipal side that it's the maintenance, the infrastructure, and then on the regional side, you're talking water quality reductions,
Permitting.
on, so that there's like a distinction, because you need both, right? We
Yes.
need to hit our goals, but we also need to support the communities. And that was why we were looking at a stormwater utility, was to right side the ship on maintenance.
Great. And that's why I'm here, is making sure that can happen.
Well, appreciate your
Okay.
input on it
Yeah.
from a public perspective. So thank you for your
Yeah,
comments.
yeah.
I think that when you're looking at what's driving the operational stormwater permits right now, it's really developed lands. I do not disagree, and I'm not being dismissive of the idea that, as they identified in the reports, there's a lot of runoff that's associated with roads. Actually, more of it actually coming from private roads, which are still outside of a lot of what we're looking at. I don't disagree. Municipalities and municipal highways need more support. I would encourage looking at local tax balances and how funding is. Most highway departments are funded through general funds.
Exactly.
So if they need more funding, then that's a local decision. But I think when it looks at looking at actually managing stormwater, being able to model it, say to the EPA, we have a path forward that we can, reduce our 3-acre goals, and we're going to stand something else up. I have a lot of concerns about focusing specifically on local municipalities, being the utilities.
Yeah, and this is going to be a longer conversation. I don't know if you want me to respond to that, or I mean, we can just have a conversation. So I think we can have both, but that's why we need to just be careful about how we structure things. There are a lot of towns that are not going to want a stormwater utility. Most towns will not want a stormwater utility, but a place like Brattleboro, a place like Montpelier, Brattleboro is not in non-compliance. But it would still be incredibly useful to have that, because we don't have the funding to.
So with that said, what I'm going to say is you hit the key point. Most municipalities don't have the capacity or desire to do this.
Yes.
Therefore, if we don't get participation, we don't get enough participation, we're not going to meet our goals. And there's nothing in statute that says you can't stand up a stormwater utility if you feel like that's the best option for your community.
There's not that in statute now, and I want to make sure there's not going to be that in statute in the future.
If you want the money to be able to maintain your infrastructure, and you feel like that's your best choice for your local community, then why would you not support that your community stand up a utility on its own?
I do support that.
Okay, so then this isn't stopping that. This is just saying that we need something that's going to be regionalized and effective enough, that's going to have a broad enough reach and impact. And you identified my concern with it being at a local. If it's voluntary,
Yes.
It is local, then you're going to have a lot of participants that are not going to, a lot of communities that are not going to participate. I forget which community you said you're a part of, but we just talked about this last week. There's only 8, so of the 251 cities and towns that are in Vermont, only 8 have city managers, 58 have town or village managers, or sorry, 8 city managers, 58 town village managers, and 43 of them operate, water and sewer infrastructure. So that's a really minuscule percent. We're not even talking 25% of the communities in this town, in our state, that have enough of an organized governing body to really effectively.
And I think that there's all of those resources, Christine, I've flagged as really important things, specifically in chapter 1, where it talks about like disincentives or challenges to formation. And there's an opportunity for this committee and in this report to really contemplate what the state's approach should be, recognizing the need for consistency, what is the shape and scale of these utilities, but also recognizing local preferences being quite different. And are you forcing, are you encouraging and incentivizing regionalization? So something to dog ear for chapter 5, which is policy recommendations, is fundamentally, what is the state trying to do in regional utilities? Is it requiring them and participation, or is it something in between? And so that's definitely a dialogue to unpack and capture in the report, how that reaction might be taken one way or another. But I might move us away from that right now, if that's okay. We'll continue dialogue. We've got a wonderful whole year ahead of us. Please continue to join us, Senator Harrison, as you are available to keep that dialogue going. So we'll move on from chapter 4. Chapter 5 is our policy recommendation one that, again, we'll start to revisit maybe in April or May, or maybe later, and start to tease out what the conclusions of the first few chapters, what does this mean, what is being recommended, and then really try as much as we can to allow the committee as much time as possible to have these kinds of conclusionary, that's not even a word, I don't think, conversations, and if that means any proposed draft language or anything associated with that. That feels like the most critical part of this committee, is what recommendations will come out of it. So right now for the chapter, it just says propose how the statute should be amended. And then right now what we're proposing is just kind of pulling from the other chapters. So maybe the other chapters do kind of recommend where there are statutory barriers. Carrie, you had suggested a while ago the revisiting of the Clean Water Fund prioritization. I think we've caught that now in the chapter 3 as a thing that could get teased out. And then we have, from discussions with folks, contemplation of the external forces like county and regional governance study committee outcomes and recommendations. So thinking not just what would be the recommendations to resolve this, but also looking at the recommendations from the county and regional governance committee, and if there's ways to sort of hitch on to other momentum in recommendations or alignment.
I'm on that committee, and we stopped, and now we're starting again.
Oh, great.
What a
Good.
coincidence.
No, it's not good. Okay. But hopefully, ideally, we're not putting recommendations in front of the legislature that is not cognizant of other recommendations related to regional governance, particularly really for stormwater. So I don't know if there's more to talk about this chapter now, because we're not really going to dive into it or have a work group right now on it, unless there's, go ahead, Carrie.
I'm intrigued by what Christine had talked about a couple of chapters ago. It all blends in together. But his whole question around the term regional is an interesting one, because I think the dialogue that we all just listened to was important to show how a utility provides service. And so what is the most efficient way we can deliver a service to the public? And the service, as I mentioned in our breakout session, it's more than just stormwater, addressing a stormwater regulation. It's about stable funding, aging infrastructure, if you have CSOs, addressing those, flood mitigation, water quality, ecology, aesthetics, quality of life, property value preservation, and stabilization of our river corridors. And So all those reasons are for why we're here. It's about protecting our backyard surface waters. And in recognition of that and the need to find an efficient way to deliver the services, it does, and we've been wrestling with the whole idea of region. I just want to throw out the possible idea when we think about region is it could also be statewide. We're a small state, and not to lose that opportunity to be thinking about in terms of addressing the recognitions that some of our small communities are so small they don't even have they're struggling with having adequate resources, staffing now to address their local zoning and administration needs. And in recognition of those small town constraints and other constraints, when we think about regional, let's also put on even that concept of a statewide utility in an option to efficiently deliver services in an equitable manner.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we have one more chapter that has been the weird and other chapter for now that might be worth talking through with the committee where these things should sit. Don't really know if they're a standalone chapter. I'm not sure if our chair will be able to join us. I'm really hopeful that he is for the last half hour or soon because I know he wanted to speak to some of those TMDL questions. We'll continue this discussion until he joins. Or we can put the TMDL conversation on for February. These were the last two items when we were building this chart that felt a little out of place. The first one is recommending how a regional utility could address some parcel-based issues. And then the legislature listed out two in particular as examples of ones that they heard testimony on, which is in those scenarios of lacking a homeowners association, how a regional utility could improve that issue in a cost-effective and equitable way, or in situations where there's an upstream landowner that's not subject to 3-acre, that's releasing stormwater onto sites subject to permitting. So there's that one, and then there's also recommending whether stormwater permitting in general could be streamlined. So I'll stop there and say, are there thoughts on? My only thought was the entire Act 37 also charges us with doing a public resource guide, which is asking the state to speak to this first one quite a bit. These weird nuggets of challenges and the state's recommendations of it. It's not going to speak to how a regional utility could resolve that. But is sort of like how approaches to dealing with 3-acre without a homeowners association or Terry, I'm going to stop talking because I know that you're leading some of that and exactly what it's covering. It's tangential, but not exact.
You're right. This is really focused on the utility aspect. How could a utility help those situations versus the resource guide is really about a guide written more for the public to explain certain options that could be considered for these situations.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't have as much of a utility element. It doesn't mean we could perhaps include components related to utility in that.
Okay.
But this would be, I think, more of the meat of that content.
Thanks, Terry.
So
Steve.
with Act 37, I don't recall the whole public information and guidance and all that. I don't recall that being part of the study committee's charge.
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to clarify that.
No, exactly. But it's something else in Act 37. So just sort of a question.
The state was charged with that responsibility that
Yeah.
this committee was. I just don't want to get us
Correct.
distracted on things that
That's
we don't
right.
need to burden ourselves with.
Right.
We have a lot already to work on.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I didn't mean to suggest that. I was curious if in the same way that other chapters can point to existing resources,
Okay.
is this something we could be like, look at the public resource guide,
Understood. Yep.
Yeah. but maybe not if it's not exactly one for one.
Just a suggestion, sometimes these public resource guides, if you have a flow chart that people can follow really well, you know, like, oh, I'm creating 5,000 more square feet of impervious. What does that mean? You know, and in my part of a neighborhood, do they have a previous Act 250 permit? I mean, all these things that can make it as easy for people to follow. It's just a recommendation. It helps a lot. Same thing on the operational side, right? Your 5,000 square feet and the half acre, and just having it really spelled out so a layperson could understand when they need to hire an engineer to do their work. Sometimes they don't, but a lot of times they do.
Great idea.
Carrie,
And
Oh,
Lisa,
it looks like you're on mute, Carrie.
Gosh, that's one way of cutting me off, I guess, is to just pretend I was not on mute. I was just going to comment on the first one, kind of interesting, but the way you structure your fee can be built in a way of creating the incentives you're seeking. In other words, that fee can be reduced. Land parcels can receive credit for actions taken to disconnect their system and their contribution to a stormwater system. So I think that helps to deal with perhaps where you have, in this case, you're lacking homeowner association generally, but if you have a neighborhood that's contributing to the system, you could still create a kind of an incentive contained in that structure. So it's something we can flush out further, but I just wanted to flag that the fee can be structured as an award system as well. And then regarding the other one, relating to the permitting, I mean, I think that's largely must be within the purview of A&R to determine how would you best streamline it. At least in the context of a utility model, you can help ensure that there's no duplication of effort, obviously, so that can help streamline it. It's the duplication that and the time element relating to flushing out that duplication is oftentimes a major cost driver. So to the extent to which it's streamlined, a utility can be designed to, again, help provide credit for where there's already stormwater actions being taken to mitigate the stormwater impacts.
yeah,
So is it contemplated that the utility would have regulatory as well as financial authority?
Chapter 2 asks how a regional utility could assume the permitting obligations on behalf of sites. I don't think it's contemplating right now that they are taking the regulatory authority of the state.
Yeah, because I think it's just important for the state to have that
Right,
authority.
exactly. That's
And I'm
not
not suggesting
what this
the
is
towns
exploring.
would be implementing, and they may have regulations that are higher than the state, but the state has to do the baseline.
It's fair enough.
Yeah.
Senator. It is important to know that the state does have the ability to delegate its authority, though, to local
Yes.
communities.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So,
Or I knew another state was it.
right.
Yeah.
So, agreed, but that's there if they, the legal structure is already there for that to happen if it wants to. I do want to go to speak to the 3 acre aspect because the question here for chapter 5, talking about, well, more or less how communities that don't have HOAs. Because I think that's a big part of why we are here today and why there's been so much angst in our communities over this new permit. And I think the challenge with it is that they don't have HOAs, and it's not that they don't want to, implement stormwater practices. They don't have land. There's no common land, right? And I think one of the things, and I hope we can look at and would charge a regional utility to look at. Is to find alternatives for those communities to identify the amount of phosphorus that's not being captured by those communities, because the state lost their opportunity, in my opinion. The state failed. And it's nothing personal, anybody sitting in this room, but the state failed to actually follow up and make sure that the operational stormwater systems, the post-construction systems were installed as they were supposed to be. The land was never designated. The land is no longer there. And so now to reach back and tell these homeowners that you have to now come back together, somebody has to sacrifice some of their land, give up some of their land so a stormwater system can be implemented, I think is the crux of most complaints. I think in communities where those systems exist, if they're not compliant with current standards, that's a different avenue. But I think that if we can find a way to capture those phosphorus reductions from communities that don't have HOAs, that don't have public and shared lands amongst that community, where there is no current stormwater system in place, I think we could probably eliminate half of the concerns around the 3-acre permit. That phosphorus reduction needs to be captured somewhere else. Understood. But we need to understand what that is. How many communities don't have those HOAs? How many communities don't have those systems in place? And that would be something that I would look to the state to help us to identify, if this committee was the support of that approach.
And many of the people who live in these streets don't want an HOA. They bought their homes intentionally without having an HOA. So it's not just what you're saying, it's true, but there's another piece of it too. They don't want anything to do with this HOA.
Understood.
I think they'd rather just pay a stormwater utility fee, and not have to deal with, they don't want to be part of an HOA. And
I agree.
It gets messy because in our town, the town took over maintaining the system. Most of them didn't even know there was a system.
Right.
So it gets very messy.
Can I just add on to this? Because it's and then there's another issue where there's a lot of sites where they haven't been developed at all, because when the sites were determined, they weren't big enough. And so there are parcels that nobody is going to use, which is a real waste because they're close to towns, but it's because of stormwater. So there's multiple issues in the state.
If there's land there and it was designated for the use of stormwater,
No.
It's a hard argument not to use it for stormwater.
Right, no, it wasn't designated for stormwater. There are lots that are already platted that are not buildable lots now. Or there's one house with 10 other lots that are not being built and can't be built.
Why wouldn't?
Because they're not big enough now.
They're increasing the impervious, but there's no place to put the stormwater management.
Yes. And so
that's
that's
kind
an
of
issue
fighting
too.
the housing need,
Yeah,
right?
And those people aren't even talking to us because they're not even here. So it's a
Right.
similar issue that you're talking about, but it's bigger than that.
Yeah, no, right. I understand, but the stormwater is deterring away from the residential development and our housing issue. That's we've been saying that for the last 10 years.
Right, and expansion, we know can trigger stormwater permit, and I believe you don't get credit if you remove existing impervious, right? I don't think if you're expanding a site to create more impervious, you can't say, okay, I'm gonna reduce it on this other part of the site, right? It's not, you don't get a credit.
If you reduce enough to get below a threshold, like 1 acre of the total resulting, that
Then you might be able
but
to,
otherwise.
right, it's not counted as a credit,
Plotted
But in
parcels that are
municipal
developed
utility,
to
it could be.
plotted.
Depending on
We
how you
have-
structure it.
maybe.
We have a comment from Carrie, and then I want to maybe close up this part of the conversation and look towards next steps in preparation for February. Yes, Carrie.
Thank you. Again, today's been a fantastic day and great conversations. I just want to also just set the stage. I don't think we shouldn't be pointing fingers. You could point a finger on the developers that have, developed the landscape and failed to put in the stormwater controls. You can point to, developers that have maximize the use of the lot and what's left is just not optimal for managing the stormwater runoff. So I think the state has always had limited resources and they've always been doing the best they can with limited resources. I think what we're here today, instead of pointing fingers, is to really help identify these real issues facing municipalities and landowners and try to wrestle to, the 80-20 rule. Well, how can we come up with some, concepts, some ideas, some strategies that may not be perfect as the perfect solution across all scenarios, but gets us 80% of what we're seeking. And so I just want to point that out because I think we're all we're all in this, living on this land together, and we're all struggling with how to accomplish clean water for that next generation. And so the extent to which we can just wrestle with these questions, important to identify the barriers and the problems, but let's really focus on how we're going to best work together on this.
Can I follow up to
Sounds
that?
good.
Carrie, I agree with you 100%. And the developers do have a level of responsibility. And I would, I'm a little bit, and I'm not trying to point fingers. I don't think the state took it that way. I'm just saying that we shouldn't try to go back, and if there's no land and there's no land, it's unfair to burden residents that bought parcels without HOAs, or, now we're going to go back and force them into these situations that they never volunteered, never bought into. That's where we're hearing a lot of complaints from, as I'm sure you are too. But going to the developer point, and we talk about funding opportunities, it's really still unclear to me why, if those developers that were responsible for implementing these systems failed to do so, they had permit requirements, they failed to meet those permit requirements. What's the reasoning that there's been no pursuit on legal enforcement follow-up on that? There's statutes, there's rules, it's $12,000 something, $2,500 a day for violations. Yet I don't know of a developer that's actually been brought into the court and asked to pay restitutions for selling that lot instead of putting stormwater systems in it.
Well,
So
just anecdotally, I heard about leaving the state, going bankrupt, and even dissolving. So it's it's hard to track down the.
And we're a little bit off topic on this piece of it, and definitely a valuable dialogue on enforcement playing a role of regulatory. It certainly always can play a role in offsetting the costs of incentive payments if regulation is there as a stronger hand. In terms of this particular chapter, I think right now what I might suggest to the committee is it sounds a bit like it's more of a lens to turn back to after there's some conclusions and recommendations to say, well, this is how this recommendation can really resolve the HOA issue, and it's not really a standalone chapter for now. And so maybe we just keep them there as placeholders, something that we'll find the right home for, but not spending too much of our time deep diving into that content. If that works, thumbs up. Okay, great. We'll do that for now. And then chapter 4, we might follow up. Luce and Brian, I think, are sort of tag teamed for chapter 4. So we'll follow up with you two in terms of maybe having another initial meeting and thinking a bit more about that operations section for you folks. Looking towards February, do you want to reshare our agenda and talk about? Thank you, Danny. Go for it.
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
I can be done.
Yeah, so as always, if you have any other materials that you think are helpful for other members of the study committee, feel free to send them to me and I'll get them posted on the materials page. I've reached out to SEMSWA and they are all set to present on our February 12th meeting. It's going to be roughly, we're going to try to block off an hour of the meeting, and the presentation itself is going to be 30 to 45 minutes roughly, and we'll try to leave a good chunk of time afterwards for questions. So it's kind of just going to be how SEMSWA came to be and the challenges and successes they faced, but they're also going to try to orient their presentation to some of the specific charges that the study committee is tasked to focus on. So if you have any, we welcome you to bring any initial questions you have for SEMSWA. And yeah, and we've attached their annual report from 2007. It was their first one that we could find, and it just kind of outlines some of the data and background information for the organization. And then in our last meeting, there was a request to have updated numbers from the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report, because we initially shared the 2024 report because that's all that was available. The 2025 report is coming out hopefully next week, January 15th. I don't believe there's going to be a public webinar or any sort of presentation for it. There's not one scheduled at least, but if a recording ever does become available, I'll make sure to put that on the materials webpage and notify all the committee members. But you can look to find the report next Thursday on the Clean Water Initiative website. The link is in this agenda. I'll also try to be prompt and get it on our materials page pretty quickly.
Thanks, Danny. And I know that the tracking accounting team very often gets asked to testify in the State House on this annually. And so we'll have at least that recording that we can share, which gives you a high level understanding of the 80 plus page. I don't actually know the exact number this year. It's a long report, so high level might be valuable for these folks. So thank you so much, Danny, for organizing that, and Christine for suggesting this contact. If you want to look at their annual report and just think of it through the lens of your work group, if you have questions you want to prepare, that might be helpful. If we do have time next time, we'll ask the chair to speak more about the TMDL questions that have come up, particularly around like when are we starting to rub up against reopening it and where are the boundaries there. We'd also like to, sooner rather than later, do a deeper dive on definitions. What is regional, municipal, what is a stormwater utility, so that it can really help inform some of those folks. So you might see that on the agendas as well. I'll take Carrie's comment and then we'll make space for the last public comment section of the agenda. Yeah, Carrie.
Thank you. I've been just ruminating on Christine's most recent comment. I find it really important, and that it'd be interesting to know if, as we document issues that arise from what we had just talked about, those landowners that are caught up in this that don't have an association of sorts, for example. And I'd really be interested to somehow capture in this report, what is the state doing now to ensure that there's not a moving target of worsening conditions or future similar examples that are only going to make it that much more of a challenge to manage stormwater in the future? Are we, through our education programs or through outreach or through what is the state, or is it a gap in terms of the type of information and training we need to provide developers, or we need to provide regulators to ensure that we're not, it's not a moving target of a worsening condition of those gaps that are falling through the cracks here?
Great, thank you, Carrie.
And if it's nothing, that's helpful, because that should be a recommendation that comes out of this, is to ensure that we're not we're trying to kind of stop the bleeding, I guess.
Any final committee thoughts before we open it up for public comment? Public comment? If you're online, feel free to raise your hand or just come off mute. See no hands, I see no off muters. Are we motioning to adjourn? I don't think we are. Adjourned.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Have a good January. We'll be in touch as soon as feasible to get those work groups continuing. A really rich dialogue. Bye, everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And staff, we're debriefing next steps in here.